Again, my name is Lee Liming. I work with the Globus team at University of Chicago. I'm the Director of Professional Services. The topic for this webinar is how to automate data and compute management tasks using Globus. So I'm going to give you a kind of a lightning summary of the different ways that you can automate things when you're working with compute or data using Globus. This is, there we go. This is one in a series of webinars that the Globus team is offering to the NSF Access cyber infrastructure community. The next three of these are on the screen. We have an introduction to Globus on January 22nd at 1 p.m. Central Time, and a webinar on computing or using Globus Compute on February 19th. And then the webinar that we're doing today will be repeated again in March. If you have people that you want to recommend attend, I'd urge you to mark that on your calendar and get out the word if you think that this goes well today. um, so very quickly, I want to remind everybody who's here, we always do this when we give a Globus talk. Globus is a nonprofit service developed and operated by the University of Chicago. Our mission is to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of researchers who are engaged in data-driven science and scholarship through sustainable software that we develop and operate at the University of Chicago on the research community's behalf. Operations of the Globus system are funded by our subscribers. We have a few of them listed here on the screen, but you should know that there are way more than we could possibly put on a single slide. We've got more than 250 sustaining subscribers to the Globus ecosystem, and we're very grateful to their support. It helps us keep the Globus system running and provide user support and documentation and webinars like the one today. New features, significant new features in the Globus system. We're talking big ones like the flow service that I'm going to be talking about today, are developed with support from the organizations on the screen here. And we're very grateful to them to help us continuing to make Globus more valuable to the research community. If you are joining us because you saw this advertised in Access, you might be interested to know that there are more than half of the resources that are in the Access, the National Science Foundation's Access ecosystem that support Globus in one way or another. Those that support Globus data transfer are on the screen today. You can see they come from 9 of the resource providers. Another 2, so a total of 11, are sustaining subscribers to Globus. And so they actually help us keep Globus running for the rest of the research community. And again, we're very grateful to them. And it's also good for all of you to know that if you're using any of these systems, and they do include most of the big systems on NSF Access, you will be able to use the things that I'm talking about. You'll probably also be able to use them at your university or research laboratory or federal agency, wherever you're coming from. But we wanted to highlight the ones that Access provides as well. All right, so let's dig into our topic for today. You will probably all agree with me that data curation in the research space has become a lot more complex over the last decade or two. The pictures you see on the screen right now are just examples of many of the research instruments that all of you have in labs at your universities or research laboratories. They all generate a lot of data, and they all in many cases, they are generating data day in and day out, sometimes 24/7 even. And you need to have a way of handling all of that data. So this dramatic change in the amount of data that we're producing as researchers, and also the workloads that are being generated, just analyzing all that data, curating it, sharing it with collaborators, et cetera, demands larger and larger scales of automation. And so what I wanted to do today was give you an overview of how Globus can help you with that automation. What we have on the screen right now are 4 of the key elements of the Globus system. Three of them are I'm going to be talking about today: the timer service, the Globus command line interface, which is really great for scripting. If you are comfortable with writing shell scripts, you'll love the Globus command line interface. And also I'll spend about half of the webinar talking about the Globus Flow service, which is the most advanced automation system that we currently offer. I'm not going to talk a lot about the rest of the Globus platform today. I would encourage you to come back in January for the Getting Started with Globus webinar, where we'll be covering kind of an expansive overview of the whole Globus platform. And we'll talk a little bit more about the fact that we offer web interfaces, APIs, and software development kit. But anyway, today we'll be focusing on these three, and they kind of go in order of simplicity to complexity. The timer service, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. I will show it to you. It's really easy to use and very useful for some cases. I'll spend a little bit more time on the command line interface, give you an example of how you would use that, and how to learn more about how to use it for more complicated things. And then, like I said, I'll spend about half of the time talking about the flow service because it has a lot of features in it and is really useful and probably requires a bit more explanation. So let's talk about the timer service. If you are familiar with Globus data transfer, you know that we offer a web interface that's really easy to use. I'm actually going to switch over to it right now and just show you. This is what our web interface looks like. It's in its simplest form. It's two panels. You have a source um, storage system over here and a destination storage system over here. And you can pick something over here and say, I want to start a transfer. And whatever you've picked over here will be transferred over here, and it just works. What you probably aren't as familiar with is the fact that in the middle, between the two starts, you can either hit start over here or start over here if you select something on this side. In between them, though, there's an options pop-up. And if you pop this thing up, you will see that at the bottom of it, it says schedule, start, and repeat. This is the web interface for the timer service. What it means is that whatever transfer you set up here and start when you do start, you can have it actually happen at a later time if you want to, and you can have it repeat on a schedule. And the web interface makes it really easy for you to set this up. So you could have the same transfer happen maybe every day or every week if you want to, in order to keep two, like a source and a destination, synchronized. Also on this options page, there are transfer settings, and you'll notice that some of them have to do with synchronization. Apply a particular sync level, and you can pick either file doesn't exist or the file size is different or the modification time is newer. So it'll only transfer things when these conditions are met. Otherwise, it will it will not transfer things a second time if you do the transfer over and over and over again. Um, you can have it either delete things on the destination that are no longer on the source or leave them there. You can have it preserve the modification times on the source. Whole bunch of options that you can do, but the ones that are really important for the transfer service are the ability to start at the transfer at a particular future time, and you can use the nice calendar pop-up to pick the time or the when you want it to start. Let's say we want it to only happen on Saturdays, so the transfer won't actually start when I hit start, but it'll start on tomorrow, which is Saturday, and I just type in a time like I don't know, 12:40 a.m. just so it doesn't happen the same time everybody else does things on the hour. And I could have it repeat. I could have it repeat, for example, every 7 days. Yeah, 7 days. And you can say how long you want it to go. Do you want it to happen until a particular date or um, after a certain number of times? So you could say maybe after 52 times. So every week for a year, this transfer will happen. So that's the simplest interface to the transfer service. I'm going to switch back. There are other ways that you could create timers. I will show you well, I actually won't show you in the CLI section, but you can learn how to do it on your own. Um, you can create timers with our command line interface or with our APIs and Python software development kit. A final way that is new is that you can also, I'm sorry, no, those are the ways that you can create timers. Um, what I showed you was a timer for data transfer, but hang on a second. But you can also start Globus flows, which I'll talk about in the second half of this webinar, as a timer. So your timer can either be data transfer or it can be running some kind of automation. So before we move on, I want to check really quickly to see if we have any questions about the timer service, because that's really all I'm going to say about it. If you want to repeat a data transfer or you want to run an automation on a regular basis, this is how you would start it. Any questions before I move on to talk about the command line interface? You can put your questions, by the way, in chat, or I'm not sure if you're able to unmute, but you can absolutely put questions in chat. I don't see any there yet.
Yes, you can unmute, but there's no questions in chat yet.
Okay, fair enough. All right, I'm going to quickly move on. I have not done this presentation before, and so I'm a little nervous about getting through everything in the amount of time that I want to spend. I want to spend about 45 minutes or so and then have time for discussion afterwards. So let me just go ahead. There'll be more time for questions later. Before we get into talking about the command line interface and the flows interface, I need to give you a couple of important key concepts. The first one is about the identities that you use when you do things. In other words, how you authenticate and what permissions you use. When you're automating things in a system, for example, if you have a lab and you want to make sure that data from your lab is automatically transferred, say, to campus computing, your research computing center for analysis or something like that, and you want it to happen all the time and you don't necessarily want it to be human driven, you really don't want to be using your permissions that you have as an individual. You don't want whatever scripts you develop or flows that you develop to have all the permissions that you normally have when you log into Globus. Think about it. I mean, you might have access to well, you certainly have access to your own systems, like your own laptop and things like that. But you may also have access to national resources like access high performance computing systems or cloud systems. You might have access to your campus computing systems. You don't want to give your scripts the ability to do things on all of those systems. You really should probably limit them to what they need in order to get the job done. So a practice that we strongly recommend is that rather than using your own permissions for your automations, you instead create something called an application ID. And I'm going to show you how you do that using the Globus web interface. It's very easy to do. And what it'll give you is it'll give you a client ID and a client secret. So another ID that you can use and give permissions to. Um, and a secret that you can use for authenticating. So your script can use that client secret to authenticate as that client ID. When it does, it'll only have the permissions that you've granted to that ID, none of the other permissions that other people have given you to their systems. So let me show you how this works. Whoops, I just switched my slides too. Didn't mean to do that. Hang on. Go back. Okay. All right, so in Globus, if you go to, I'm going to go ahead and use this window. If you go to settings in Globus, there's a part of the web interface that most people are not very familiar with. It's not the most commonly used. Notice there's a tab here in settings called developers. If you click on developers, it gives you a whole new web interface for generating application identities. The section that we're interested here is register a service account or application credential for automation. Okay, very handy. Just look for the word automation, and that's the one that you want. Over here on the right, there are projects. In your developer section, you may not have any projects yet. I've created tons of them for managing all sorts of things. The project that I'm going to work with today is called Globus Tutorials. Oops, and I haven't authenticated recently, and so it's going to make me do that. This will just take me a second. Sorry, I probably should have done this before we started. Okay. Fortunately, I logged into University of Chicago earlier today, and I don't have to do it again. But let's get back to where we were. Okay, here is my Globus tutorial projects. Notice that I have one, it says registered apps. I kind of think that's maybe a mistitle. It should say something like registered application identities. This one right here, My Lab Automation, I'm going to be working with today. And so let me show you what it looks like. When I look at it, there is a client UUID, this thing right here. And there is also an identity, this thing right here. And notice that it ends in @clients.auth.globus.org. So it's the same UUID, same big long string, random gobbledygook, but it's followed by @clients.auth.globus.org. That means it was created by somebody who was using Globus. This ID right here, you can put in permissions to folders in your Globus collections. You can put it in groups and make it a member of groups that you own. You can use it anywhere that you would use a human identity. The difference is that rather than referring to a person, it refers to a particular script or a flow that you define, or basically a program. So you can give permissions to this thing and it won't be able to use any of the rest of the permissions that you've been granted in Globus. It's very handy. There's also something here called the secrets or client secrets. Down here under client secrets, there are two that I generated in the past. One a long time ago for a video I was doing, and one here just yesterday to prepare for this webinar. What I want to point out about these is that these are you don't see on the screen the secret. Globus will never share the secret with you. The only way to get Globus to display one is to add a new one. So I'll do that right now. It'll ask you what's it for. I'll say access demo and generate secret, and voila, it'll give you a secret string. Okay, think of this as a big password. This is basically the password for this identity up here. What I strongly recommend is that you copy it to the clipboard by clicking that icon, the clipboard icon, and then paste it into a notepad or a file or something so that you can access it later, because there's absolutely no way that Globus will ever give that to you again. It'll show you down here that you created it, and it'll tell you when it was, if it was a while ago. It'll even give you an identifier for that secret, but this identifier is useless. There's really no point in having it other than to ask for technical support from the Globus team. It is not the secret, and there's no way to display the secret again. So bottom line, copy and paste your secret immediately as soon as you create it, and then use it as a password anytime you have to authenticate as this client identity. Okay, so again, to create one, you would go to your project. Let me see. Oh, yeah, back to registered apps. You would click on add an app, register a service account or application credential for authentic automation. And all you really have to type in is just a name for it. Like, I don't know. The name I used before was lab automation. So maybe I'll just do something like lab automation number 2. I don't know. And it just creates a fresh identity that has no permissions, and it's totally isolated from the rest of your account. Okay.
There
All
is a
right.
question, Lee.
Okay. Good. Good.
Are can application IDs be shared, managed by multiple
Ah,
people?
excellent.
I'm picturing a situation where a person who does this setup moves on to a new position or institution. What
Yes.
happens to the application ID?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. It's actually right here, the third bullet under here. Another reason for why you want to use an application ID is because you can share it with your teammates. So let me show you how that works. I've got every application ID you create is part of a project. The first thing that it'll do if you don't have a project already is Globus will ask you, do you want to create a project to put this ID in? And you basically have to. Your project and any application IDs you've registered under that project, you can share with other people by clicking on the roles tab. In the roles tab here, you can then assign a new role and you can add other people. Notice the people, these are all me, these are all my linked identities here. This one down here is a group that I added. I added a group called Liming Lab Members. Anybody who's a member of this group can see the Globus Tutorials project in the Developers tab in the Globus web app, and they can get at any of these applications that are registered under the project. So yes, you can share, and they can generate secrets. They obviously cannot get the secrets that you've generated. You have to give them to them out of band somehow because Globus won't do it for you for them. But they can definitely get the client ID and generate new secrets if they need to. So somebody could pick up that client ID and start managing it if you leave the project. Okay, good question. The other thing that's great about application IDs, and the third reason, and this is really the killer reason why you want to use it, is because applications authenticate non-interactively. You do not have to go through a web login flow in order to use an application ID. And I will show you that in just a minute when we get to the CLI example. I'll show you how you authenticate, and there's no web browser involved. So if you are saying to yourself, oh my gosh, I love Globus, but I hate the fact that I have to keep on going through these login flows in order to do anything, you probably should be using an application ID instead. Okay. All right. I wanted to point out if you want a deeper dive into how to create and manage application identities, go on YouTube and search for Create an Application Identity in Globus. You'll get a great video that I put together. It's only about, I think, 3 to 5 minutes long. Very quick. Just walks you through the process of generating an application ID and managing it. All right. Second major important topic about automation in Globus that we have to cover before we can move on. You probably should be thinking about using guest collections. Okay. In the Globus, for data transfer and data access in Globus, we use collections. Collections are just a name that you give to a folder and all of its contents on a storage system somewhere. So whenever you transfer, from or to, you have a source collection and a destination collection. Well, it turns out there are two kinds of collections. There are mapped collections, which are the default. That's what you will use unless you've done something special to create a guest collection. Mapped collections, they require a human being to consent to access that mapped collection. So the first time you go to it, it'll say, are you okay with the Globus web app accessing this collection on your behalf and being able to do things for you in that collection? And you have to say yes in order for it to do that. So you have to go through a web login flow in order to do that. That consent is only valid for a limited time period, maybe a couple days. So if you come back a couple days later, you have to do the same consent over again. It's a way of making sure, it's a security measure to make sure that nobody has somehow gotten a hold of the web session that you're using and is using it without your permission. So you have to continually go back and re-authenticate and give your consent to use the thing. Um, you can access map collections using application IDs non-interactively, but it's harder to do than with guest collections. It requires your endpoint administrator to set up the permission for you. So you have to go to whoever runs the storage system and say, hey, will you please let this application identity that I've created have access to this collection that you created? And they'll set it up for you and tell you that they did it. Obviously, anytime you have to go to somebody and ask them to do it for you, it's going to take longer to set up. And if you ever have to change it in the future, it's just a nuisance. So what I would recommend instead is that you use the guest collection feature in Globus. Oh, geez, I keep on hitting that button. Sorry. Um, use the guest collection in Globus. Create a guest collection from your map collection. There's all kinds of documentation on the Globus website about how to do that. What you'll get then is a new collection that only has the folder that you created the guest collection for. So it's restricted, which is cool. It's only shared with the IDs that you share it with. So it starts out only being shared and accessible by you, but you can add your application ID to the permissions on it and give the application either read permission or read and write permission to that collection. And then the application or script or flow that you've generated can do things in that collection without having to authenticate interactively in the web browser. It's fantastic. The nice thing about guest collections is that you can usually create them self-service once somebody's given you access to a mapped collection. So if somebody's given you access to campus storage or their storage on an access resource, um, you can probably create a guest collection there yourself, and you don't have to ask anybody for help with that. The feature of creating guest collections has to be enabled by the administrator, but in a lot of cases, that's already been done for you. You don't even have to ask anybody for it. If it doesn't work when you try it, you might need to go to the administrator and say, hey, will you please enable guest collections for me so that I can create guest collections and do things with it? Um, all right, so two things. One, application identities, and two, guest collections. Keep those in mind because we're going to keep coming back to them. All right, now let's move on to the Globus command line interface. Um, Let me just check real quick before we do that. Any more questions? Looks like Lev has already handled the question about projects and collections, I think. Okay, if not, go ahead and ask again, and we'll come back to it. Sorry about that. Okay, so I want to tell you about the Globus command line interface. It's really great for scripting. So if you are a shell script person, you love shell scripting, you're going to love the command line interface. It's a standalone application distributed by Globus. So you actually go to our website, go to either of these links here, the docs.globus.org/CLI for command line interface. You can also go to the GitHub page for it and get the source for it. And it'll also have instructions about how to install it. It is Python, and so you will need a Python environment on a system in order to install the Globus CLI. But once you've got Python, you can just pip install the Globus CLI, and it will, and you can even automatically update it when there's an update. It'll tell you when you start it, hey, we've got an update. Do you want to install it? And you can do that if you want to. It's very easy to use. It uses all of the same Globus security that our web application uses, which means it uses access tokens, but it manages them all for you. So you do Globus login, Globus logout, all those great command line things, and it will manage all of the tokens that are needed for the things you need to do. If you ask to do something that needs a new access token, whoops, it'll walk you through the process of getting whatever you need. So it'll walk you through any logins or anything you need to do. If you're using your human identity with the command line interface, like, in my case, it would be lliming at uchicago.edu, and it knows that it's Lee Liming, and people have given me permissions and things, then you will have to log in with your web browser. But the CLI will walk you through the process of doing that, so don't worry about that. Um, let's see. You don't have to use your human identity, though. You can use the CLI with an application identity that you've created. And that is what I would recommend if you're writing scripts that automate things. So I'll give you an example of that in a sec. The Globus CLI Globus is the executable, so you would type Globus and then a command. Globus login gets you logged in and set up to do things with Globus. Globus logout will delete all of your tokens so that the next person who comes along, won't be able to do things on your behalf. To get help, type Globus list dash commands or Globus dash dash help. They actually give different levels of help, and so you might want to get familiar with both of them. The list commands just gives you like the dump of all the commands. Help actually is a little bit higher level. It gives you a little bit more information about how to use the tool and a little bit more context. One thing you need to know when you're using the Globus CLI is that you don't get to use all of the really user-friendly names for collections or other things in Globus that you get to use when you're in the web interface. The web interface displays, like, I don't know, Purdue Anvil for the name of a collection that has storage at Purdue in their Anvil system. You don't have to know a big, alphanumeric string in order to do that. The CLI needs the UUID for that. And so I will show you how to get those UUIDs and how to use them. You can always query in the CLI to discover those UUIDs using search, list, get, etc. Actions on things. So yeah, okay. So I'm going to show you an example. Very simple example. If you have a if you have a data transfer that you do regularly, for example, if you have an instrument in a lab that generates data and you need to get the data that's generated there routinely transferred over to the compute facility on campus, where you have a big cluster that can do, I don't know, image reconstruction of the data that came out of the instrument, you can do that in the web browser really easily, of course, by pointing and clicking. But let's say that you have to do that 24/7, I don't know, once every 20 minutes or something like that. You do not want to be pointing and clicking all day long or have an operator doing that all day long. Instead, you probably want to script it. With some kind of shell script on the instrument system that makes that transfer happen routinely. So, how do we start a transfer in Globus using the CLI? Let me walk you through that. Um, so first of all, there we go. Window management, kind of hard. Okay. So first of all, let me just show you the Globus CLI. Globus help gives you a dump of all the help stuff. This is after you've installed it with pip install, but our website walks you through how to do that very easily. One of the important commands in there is who am I? Globus Who Am I will tell you who you're logged in as. And notice that when I do it right now, it says liming at uchicago.edu. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So that's me. Right now, the Globus CLI on my system has access to everything that I have permission to. That's a little scary. I probably don't want that to be the case. If I were to do Globus task show and see some of my activity history, whoops, show is not the right command apparently. List. Sorry, got to remember my vocabulary here. It shows all the things that I've done recently, and you can see that I've accessed a lot of different systems. I've accessed systems at the University of Chicago, at USDA, at Access Anvil. Um, I probably don't want my shell script in my lab to have those kinds of permissions. So what do I need to do in order to not do that, to isolate it? So the first thing I want to show you, well, actually, yeah, the second thing, yeah, here's what we want to do. The first step is to use an application identity, to set up the Globus command line interface, to use an application ID instead of using my personal identity. We do that by setting some environment variables. So again, this is all shell commands. Forgive me if you aren't familiar with the Linux shell, but these are just setting some variables. We'd have to tell the shell what my client ID and my client secret are. So you'll remember back here, lab automation, I set up an application ID. Here's the client UUID, and I can just copy and paste that. I can't get the secret from the web interface, but fortunately I did write it down. And so I'm going to show you here in the shell if I actually have it in a nice little script here. Here are the client ID and secret that I generated for today's demonstration. It's just one UUID for the ID and a secret string for the secret. So I'm going to go ahead and source that setup. And um, now that I've done that, if I do Globus, who am I? It will no longer say liming at uchicago.edu. Now it will say, oh, you're this identity. Notice it's at clients.auth.globus.org. This string right here is the same as the client ID right here. So now it only has access to the things that that client ID has done. And if I do Globus task list, it's different. See up here, I had access to all those systems. Down here, I did a few tests before this webinar, and they had one source and one destination, and that's because those are the only things that I've given this identity permission to. So it's a nice way of isolating permissions. Okay, now um, we actually are aiming at setting up a transfer. So how do I do that? First of all, let's use some help. Globus transfer dash dash help. Now this is going to be a little ugly, so it's just a lot of options, but the basics are up here at the top. Globus transfer, source endpoint ID and a path, destination endpoint and a path. Okay. So that's really all you need. You need the source endpoint ID and destination endpoint ID and a path. Okay. What I want to do is I want to automate this transfer right here. I want to automate transferring one folder from this collection, sequencer data from the liming lab, to this collection, liming anvil incoming sequences. Okay, so this is actually this collection over here is at Purdue on their HPC system called Anvil. This over here is in my lab where I have a sequencer. And I want basically to automate, every time we generate a new scan or a new sequence, I want to transfer it over to Anvil for processing. Okay, so that's all I want to do is I just want to automate pressing this start button. That's it. Okay, so let's go ahead and again, if I show you my setup script, where is it? There it is. I have the source collection ID and the destination collection ID there. How did I get those? If you click on the dot, dot, dot here next to a collection in Globus, it'll give you details about that. And at the very bottom of that, I don't know why they put it at the bottom, probably because it's ugly. They have the UUID. And I would just copy that UUID. Notice it starts E3A8. If I go back over here, yep, E3A8. This is the string right here. Okay, so that's what you use for the source collection in your Globus transfer command. So now that I've set this all up with environment variables, I can just do Globus transfer. Oh, and also the path. This is the folder name right here. That's where did how do I get back? There we go. That's this folder name right here. Okay. So I just want to use this folder name to make sure that it transfers this folder and not the whole collection. Okay. Um, Globus transfer. I'm going to use my environment variables, source collection, colon, and the path, and then destination collection and the path. Oops. Yeah, there we go. So source collection, path, destination collection, path. Okay. And I do it, and voila, it's accepted the transfer request and given me a task ID. And actually, now if I want to, I can do Globus task show, copy and paste that task ID, and it'll tell me, oh, the transfer succeeded. It transferred 22 files, a total of, what is that, 41 gigabytes. And it got a little bit more than 3 gigabytes a second, which is cool. So basically now I know that it's done. It tells me where it came from and where it went to, so that it did the transfer. If I go back over here to the web interface now, remember, this is me logged in as myself, and hit refresh, voila, it did the transfer. I never touched this start button. It was done in the command line interface. Okay. So that's in a nutshell how you use the command line interface. You can also now do Globus task show. Whoops. List. List. Oh, shoot. And I have to type it correctly. Always challenging. And now, remember, there were three before, now there's four. This was the transfer that I just did. And this should be the same task ID that I just did up here. 2C225, 2C225, right there. Yep. So that task right there, that's basically showing me that it happened. And so you can use the Globus CLI that way. I'm trying to remember if there's anything. Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of, oh, right, permissions. So what permissions did I have to set up in order to do that? Let's go back over here to the details for this collection. Let me click on the permissions tab. Here's what it looks like. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of permissions, but notice that one in particular that I have is liming my lab automation right here. This is the client ID that we created, and I gave it read permissions. I did not give it write permissions because this is the source collection. So again, if I wanted to add to that again, I would just say share with. I would type in. Oh, I should have copied and pasted the string. Anyway, I would type in the client ID here and click on add permission, and it would add it if it wasn't already there. In this case, it already is there. It has access to everything under slash. And if I were to go backwards and go over here to, oops, the other collection and hit dot, 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 and click on permissions, you will see that I gave it permissions. There we go. My lab automation, this ID right here, has both read and write permissions. So I had to do that in order for this transfer to work with the client, with the application identity. It would have worked with my own identity, but I would have to log in interactively, and I don't want to do that. So that's why we use the application identity. All right. Let's really quickly summarize again. You can get UUIDs for collections by scrolling all the way down on the details page for a collection and getting that UUID. Let's see. This was the command we gave, Globus transfer. Oops. It really helps to use environment variables because it's annoying to have to type these UUIDs in, okay? If you're setting up an automation like I did for my lab, they never change. So you can probably grab them once, put them into a shell script, and then never touch them again. You never have to worry about accessing them again. But if you're doing it manually, it helps to have them as an environment variable. And you can put that command into any shell script that you want. Okay, last thing I'm going to say about the CLI is list commands and help. And then also go to docs.globus.org, CLI. There's an examples page off of there that is very useful. Okay. All right. Any questions about the CLI before we start talking about flows? All right. I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about flows. I'm a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to go fast. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along, and I will make sure that we cover them before we're done. So what is Flows? Flows is another service that Globus offers besides the CLI, besides data transfer. And what it does is it allows you to define a series of steps that need to happen using any of the Globus services. So it could be Globus data transfer, or it could be running a compute task somewhere. We have a whole webinar talking about how to run compute tasks. And I'm not going to get into that today because I don't have time, but I will show you some examples of it. Flows is great because it allows you to define a series of steps that need to happen repeatedly. You define them and you store that definition in the cloud in Globus. You don't have to keep it on your own system. It provides a library of flows that the community or that you have defined. You can then look up a flow that you've defined. Maybe you defined it a month ago and you need to rerun it again now. You can go back and look at our flows library, find the definition, and launch the flow. Globus will execute every step in the flow, every step in the sequence of tasks that you've defined, and make sure that it happens successfully and that it happens securely using whatever credentials you've set up for it to use. And it will also let you keep track of all the times a flow has been run and all the results of those runs. So I'll show you some of that in the web interface in a minute. Basically shows you how how your flow has been used, who's run it, and how many times it was successful, or if it failed, what step it failed at, and what you can do about that. Flows can also be collaboratively managed. So just like the application IDs that I showed you earlier, you can set up flows and make them discoverable by other people and runnable by other people. Okay. By default, they will use those people's permissions, not yours. So you define a flow, the sequence of steps that have to happen, and whoever runs it, it'll use their permissions. You can, if you need to, have the flow use independent permissions from the person who's running it. So maybe there's a step in it that can only be run, by somebody with privileged access. You can make that happen in your flow definition as well. But it's the exception rather than the rule. Normally, it uses the permissions of whoever's running it. So Globus does all of this for you. You do not have to install any software to use Globus flows. It uses all the stuff that's already deployed out there in the Globus ecosystem. So at its core, a flow is just a sequence of steps. They could be data transfers, they could be running a compute job somewhere, it could be displaying a web form in a web browser and sending somebody email and saying, hey, go to this page and click yes or no. Maybe to approve that it's okay for the flow to continue. Um, you know, it'll maybe show the results so far and then say, is it okay for you to go to the next step, or do you want to cancel the flow now? It could also be things like, adding entries to search indices in Globus Search, or um, minting a new digital object identifier for a data catalog. It could be a whole bunch of different things. There can also be choices, in other words, conditional statements in a flow, so that, depending on a condition, state of a variable, you either go down this path or you go down this path. And there can also be loops in a flow, so it can do things over and over and over again. When you run a flow, we call it a run. Okay, that may seem obvious to you, but it's because of the way I said it. When you start a flow, it starts a run. Okay, and we keep track of runs Globus keeps track of all the runs, and you can look at the history of all the runs. You can start a run from the Globus web application using a web interface. We provide, there's a start page for every flow that you can use to start it. You can use the command line interface. There's a whole section of the command line interface dedicated to flows, or you can start it through an API call, or through our software development, our Python SDK. So you can start a run a lot of different ways. When you start a run, you have to provide inputs. And the definition of the flow defines what inputs it needs. Usually it's something like a source collection. Where am I going to get the data from to start this flow? And so in the web interface, if you go to the start page, it'll display a nice selection box that lets you pick all the Globus collections in the universe. It'll let you pick the one you want to start with, and pick a path for where your input data is, and then click start and it'll start the flow. But then the run will go ahead and it'll just execute every step in the flow, and give you the monitoring information about how progress is going. And eventually, when it finishes, you'll get an email saying, hey, your flow is completed successfully and everything's been done successfully. Little bit of terminology. Every one of these little bubbles here in the diagram here is a state. So when you think of steps in the flow, we actually call them states. Most states are, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but a lot of them, like transfer, compute, all these sorts of things, those are actions. Those are things that actually happen. The flow reaches out and does something with the Globus service. We call those actions. But there are other states like wait, pass, or choice. So there are other things besides just an action. An action state, though, is when you actually say in your flow, okay, start a transfer or run a job or wait for user input. Those are managed interactions with another service. They use all of the permissions of the person who's running the flow unless you've said otherwise. Globus provides a bunch of actions built into the system. Um, there are actions for transferring, so starting a transfer, for deleting files, making a new directory, listing the contents of a directory, checking to see if a directory or a file exists somewhere. Those are all provided by the transfer service. We have an identifier service that will mint persistent identifiers for you. It provides a identifier action for creating an identifier. Our search service allows you to ingest data into a search index or delete things from a search index. We have an email provider that provides an email notification action. So if you want your flow to notify somebody of something via email, you can set that up with the notify action. So all of these things are built in to the flows system. You don't have to do anything in order to use them. You just write your flow definition. I'll show you that in a second, and say what you want done. So how does this all work in practice? How do we envision flows being used? Well, there's all that you can do to define and deploy flows. And we expect that that's probably going to be done either by researchers who have a task that needs to be done and it can be broken down into steps and repeated over and over and over again. Or it could be done by people who, for example, own an instrument facility. Maybe they say, in order to get to complete a scan in our instrument, and get the data off and get it to permanent storage on campus, here's the flow that you need to run in order to do that. So the facility could define a flow that is the sequence of steps that have to happen in order to get the data out of their facility and onto wherever it needs to be used. Um, or it could be the research computing center defines a flow. So somebody defines flows, then they make them visible to themselves and potentially other people, maybe applications, or maybe groups that they define, or maybe the people who use the instrument facility. Um, then those people run the flows. And so there's a whole other part of the ecosystem involved with running things. Um, you know, providing the nice start page that allows you to start a flow, and also the interface that lets you see, okay, I started the flow. What's the status? What step are you on right now? How long do we think this thing is going to take? Oh, has it finished successfully? Yay. Um, when did it finish? How long did it take? All of that. That's in the running space. That's probably done by researchers who need to use systems. Um, and then finally, there is the extensibility of flows, the ability to add new action providers. So if you are a facility operator or a research computing provider, and you want to give people a way to use flows with your resource, whatever it might be, you can define new action providers that people can put into their flows that reach out to your facility and do something. If it's a data transfer, you don't need to do that because we've already provided you with the data transfer action provider. But if it's something more like something custom, like run a particular job, and you don't want to give people the ability to run any job, you just want them to do one thing, you might want to create a new action provider and put up a web page somewhere that tells people how to put that into their flow. So those are basically the three parts of the flows ecosystem: defining and deploying flows, I'll show you that in a second; running flows, I'll show you that too. I'm not going to get into creating new action providers. That's for an advanced webinar or tutorial. Okay. All right. So really quickly, what happens when you run a flow? First of all, there's an authorization step. So regardless of whether you're using the web app, the CLI, or the APIs, in order to, if you say, I want to start a flow, the first thing Globus is going to do is say, oh, do you have permission to do that? It's going to check the roles that have been set on that flow to see if you, A, can even view the flow, and B, if you can, are you permitted to run it? Because those are different permissions. Okay. Assuming that you are permitted to do it, it's then going to say, have you provided the right inputs for this flow? So if you're using the web interface, it's going to prompt you for those inputs. And you won't be able to hit the start button until you've provided the inputs that are needed, filled out the form that's needed to start this flow. But if you're using the CLI or the API, there is no interactive way to do that. You just either have to provide the input data to the API call or the CLI call, or get an error back. So it's going to validate that you've done the right thing. Then it creates a run, and it just starts chugging through all the steps of the run. And is that, it keeps on asking itself, is there another action to do? If there is, then you go and do it. And if there isn't, then you're at the end and it puts it into the finished state. That's basically, in a nutshell, what running a flow looks like. Globus provides flows that are built in. Three flows that are Globus provided. They're very common. A two-stage transfer here, and then transfer from there to the next place. So not just from A to B, but from A to B to C. Okay, that's a flow called two-stage transfer. There's another one called transfer and set permissions. So transfer from A to B, and then set permissions on B to share with other people. Okay, you can do that with the flow. And then finally move, which is the same thing as copy from A to B and then delete A. So delete the data from the source. So it really is a move it from A to B, such that there's no longer a copy at A. So those are all examples that we provide that show you how to create flows, and you can find them in the flows library, which I'm going to show you right now. Oops, what happened? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So if I click over here in the Globus web application on the flows section of the web app, you will see it starts off on the run tab, which basically shows you runs that you started in a certain, I don't know, I forget how many times, how many, I think it's 90 days. Um, but I think they should have started with the library because that shows you all the flows that are available to you. Some of them are flows, and you can actually click a button here that says Globus provided flow. Here are the three that I just told you about. So that's how you find them in the Globus web app. Notice they all have a start button here that lets you start the flow. These are all public, and so anybody can run it, but it'll use your permissions. Okay. If you want to see only flows that you created, you can do that by administered by me. I actually have a whole bunch of them because I've done a bunch of tutorials and webinars and things. And if you only want to see the ones that are runnable by you, you can limit it with that checkbox as well. Okay, so let me go to this Globus provided flow. Let's look at move, copy, and delete. And okay, this, when you click on the name, it just gives you a description of what it is. It tells you what it does, who provided it, the Globus team, etc. But if I click on start, it'll give me the start page for that flow. This flow requires input. It requires a source. It requires a destination. I don't know if I clicked something or if it did that automatically. Okay. It requires a destination. Yeah, okay. It's going to ask my permission to run the flow because Globus is kind of paranoid and it always asks permission to do everything. Okay. And then a couple optional things, optional label for the transfer task, for the delete task. This is so you can search in your activity later on and find those actions. And then do you want checksum verification on your transfer? Yes or no? Defaults to yes. Yeah. Notice that start is grayed out right now or yellowed out because I haven't provided the input yet. So if I wanted to actually use this, I would first search for a collection like sequencer data. Oh, Liming Lab. Let's find my collection. There it is. Let's find that same folder we just transferred with the CLI. Here it is, right here. Okay, I've selected it. So now I provided that input. Now let's find a destination for it. Midway at University of Chicago. And let's browse there. Where do I have? I hope I don't have a copy. Okay, it's empty. Yay. Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the data from sequencer data at the Liebing Lab to University of Chicago Midway. I'm not going to provide any other inputs. Oh, what did I not provide that's required? Oh, uh, well, that's suspicious. Um,
The label.
is the label required? Oh, the label is required. Okay. Required. There it is right there. Thank you. Okay. Um, access webinar. And now start run is enabled. Before I hit the start button, which is what everybody does, I'm going to click the examples. I realize that I'm running slightly over time. Sorry about that. You can start it with a timer if you want to. So I could make this move happen over and over and over and over and over again if I wanted to repeat every, I don't know, week for 50, for a year, if I wanted to create it as a timer. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to start it, have it do it one time, successfully started. Here's the run ID. You can view the details of the runs. You can start a new run of the flow. You can view all your runs. I'm going to view the run details just to show you what that looks like. Ooh, it needs permissions to do something. So I'm going to go ahead and give it permission. That's probably because I'm transferring to University of Chicago, which is a mapped collection. I told you about that at the beginning of the webinar, right? It requires consent in order to do something, and I need to provide my consent, so I just did. Now let's see what happens. Okay, here's my event. It's active. Here, let's go to the event log, and you can actually follow what it's doing. Woo! Lots of things. Started, initializing, doing a whole bunch of stuff. It started the transfer. We're still working. We're still working. I'm assuming it'll finish in just a second. Um, I probably should have tried this out before we did the webinar just to make sure. But basically, I just wanted you to see what, delete, starting the delete action. So it completed the transfer. Waiting for updates. This should not take very long. Uh, yep, it succeeded. Okay, so now if I go back to overview, it'll say the flow, oh, completed. Yeah, completed, and it gives you the date and time. If I go back to the file manager now, oh, shoot. I really wish I, okay, great. Let's take a look at that collection again and just make sure that it did what I think it did. Yep, that folder is no longer there. And if I go to Midway, I'm just proving to you that this worked. You can trust me if you want to, but I'm just going to show you for sure. Um, we should find under sample data. No, that wasn't where it was. Where did I put it? I put it under, gosh, I wish I could. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, this was the contents of that folder. So it put it into this, it put the contents of the folder into here and didn't actually transfer the folder itself. So yeah, it did the move the way it was supposed to. So that's how you use flows. Again, last thing I'm going to say about flows is there's a library. Use the library. Use these buttons here to pick the flows that are of interest to you. And if you are going to create your own flows, um, yeah, I ran out of time. Sorry. The hazard of doing a webinar for the first time. Um, it's actually pretty simple. There's lots of documentation on the Globus website for how you define the steps of a flow, and you can always look at the examples here. So let's look at the actual flow definition here. It looks like this. It's basically all a bunch of JSON code that basically has a bunch of steps in it. Each of these states here, this is one state, and it has a bunch of information. And our website tells you all about how you put that in there. But the thing that I want to point out to you is this action URL shows you that it's the transfer service delete action provider that is doing that delete step. And then all the rest of it is just all of the input you need to provide to that step to make it happen. So this is what a flow definition looks like. Okay. All right, final words, because I know we're over and I apologize for that. Let me get my slides back. And of course, my computer wants to do everything except bring the slides back. There we go. Okay. Um, the last things I wanted to say were here are the references for documentation for flows, docs.globus.org. Under the API section, there's a flows section. There's also Jupyter notebooks that you can use. If you go to jupyter.demo.globus.org, you can log in with Globus, and you should have permission to log in. It'll open up notebooks for you, and the one that you want to look at is called Automation Using Globus Flows, and it'll be a Jupyter notebook that walks you through the Python code to use the Flows API in our Python software development kit. Really handy and a really good way to get started using Flows. So just to review, we talked about the timer service, the command line interface, and the flows service, all different ways of automating things in Globus. And I wanted to remind you about the webinars coming up in the next few months.